Title: Autumn Letters. The wind from the station. New Haven, a small town on the east coast of the U.S., felt like it was stuck somewhere between the past and the future. Everything moved slowly here, as if time itself had nowhere to rush. In this town lived Lily, a 28-year-old literature teacher who loved old books, cinnamon coffee, and long walks alone. After a painful breakup, she decided she wouldn't open her heart again. It had already let too much pass through it. Every evening after school, Lily would stop by the old train station. She wasn't waiting for any train. She just sat on a bench, reading or writing letters she never sent. Inside them were all the things she was too afraid to say out loud. A letter without an address. One day in early October, when the leaves turned the color of orange peel, Lily found a letter under the bench. Sealed, written in beautiful calligraphy. On the envelope, it simply said, "To those who still believe in love." Inside, a man described how he had lost his wife 2 years ago. How he came to the station every day just to feel close to her, because this was where they first met. At the end, it read, "If you're reading this, maybe you're searching too. Don't be afraid. I'm here." Signed, E. A chance encounter. The next evening, Lily came earlier than usual. Her heart was pounding. She sat on the same bench, and 10 minutes later, a man appeared, tall, wearing a navy coat, gray at the temples, with a book in his hand. He sat beside her silently, and she said nothing, too. This went on for 3 days. On the 4th, she placed the letter back on the bench. He read it, then looked up at her and smiled. That's when she first heard his name, Edward. Love without promises. They began to talk, first about books, then about life. About how hard it is to feel something again after loss. They made no promises to each other. They just met, shared letters, laughed, sometimes sat in silence, the kind of silence that feels warm like a blanket. Edward was a writer who had lost his inspiration. Lily became his muse. Her first letter. A month later, Lily left her first letter at the station, this time addressed to him. In it, she wrote simple words. "You came when I had stopped expecting anything. Now I wait for the evenings, for the wind, for your laughter. Thank you for bringing back my belief in autumn and in love." Edward read it slowly, line by line. Then he just took her hand. No dramatic confessions. Just a look. And that look said more than any "I love you" ever could. Epilogue. Their letters are now kept in the New Haven Library. Behind glass, with a plaque that reads, "The Autumn Collection." A story of two hearts that found each other between the lines. The day it almost ended. The wind that day was sharper, colder. The golden leaves that usually danced across the station platform now skittered like nervous whispers. Lily arrived earlier than usual, her mind crowded with thoughts she hadn't invited. Edward hadn't shown up the day before, the first time he missed a day in over a month. She sat alone on their bench, her fingers curled around a paper cup of coffee that was more warmth than flavor. She tried not to stare at the corner where he usually appeared, tried not to let the ache in her chest grow into panic. But as the minutes stretched into an hour, her mind wandered toward the worst possibilities. Had he changed his mind? Had she misread everything between them? Maybe the letter she'd written, the one where she had opened her heart, had been too much. Maybe she'd broken whatever fragile thing they were building together. She pulled out her notebook, the one she always carried but rarely showed anyone. Its pages were lined with unsent letters, half-finished poems, pieces of herself she wasn't brave enough to say out loud. Today, she tore out a clean sheet and started to write. No filter, no careful phrasing. Edward, I don't know what this is. I don't know what we are. But for the first time in a long while, I feel something alive. And that scares me, but also saves me. So if you're not coming back, if I said too much or not enough, at least know this. I meant every word. She folded the paper and left it on the bench, under a stone, right where he usually sat. And then she walked away, slowly, glancing back just once before disappearing down the hill toward Main Street, her steps heavy. That evening, she didn't sleep. Every creak of the house, every gust against the windows made her heart race. She kept replaying conversations in her head, looking for clues, signs, mistakes. The next morning, she didn't go to the station. She couldn't. Not yet. But just before sunset, someone knocked on her door. When she opened it, there stood Edward, wind-tousled, out of breath, and holding her letter. "I wasn't avoiding you," he said immediately. "My sister, she had surgery. I had to leave town without notice. I'm sorry. I didn't want to scare you." He looked down at the paper in his hands. "And this is the most beautiful thing anyone's ever written to me." Lily didn't speak. She just stepped aside. He walked in like he had always belonged there. That night, they sat on her porch, wrapped in a blanket, listening to the wind, and saying everything they needed to without speaking a word. The train to somewhere. A week after Edward showed up on Lily's doorstep with her letter in hand, they found themselves standing side by side at the same train station where their story began. Only this time, they weren't waiting in silence. Edward had an idea. "Let's leave town," he said one morning with a crooked smile, holding 2 train tickets. "Just for a weekend. No plans. No map. Let's just see where the rails take us." Lily hesitated. She hadn't traveled in years. Her life had been carefully structured, her routines carefully guarded. But when she looked into Edward's eyes, steady, calm, and full of a quiet excitement, she nodded. That Friday evening, as the sky turned shades of honey and rose, they boarded a slow-moving train heading north. No destination printed on the ticket, just the word, "Explore Pass." It was a train meant for wanderers, for those willing to get off at unknown stops and find something new. They sat by the window, knees touching, sharing stories about childhood. Edward told her about growing up on a farm in Vermont, where silence stretched for miles and stars were sharp like diamonds. Lily spoke of her grandmother's attic, filled with dusty books and secret places where she used to hide when the world became too loud. As the train rocked gently on the tracks, something about the rhythm loosened the knots in Lily's chest. She laughed more freely, leaned into Edward when she got sleepy, and let her guard slip just a little further. They got off at a town called Maple Hollow, population 2,304 according to the hand-painted welcome sign. It was the kind of place where strangers were rare and time forgot to rush. They stayed at a little inn run by a woman named Ruth, who served pumpkin muffins with warm cider in the mornings and never asked too many questions. That first night, Lily and Edward walked through the old streets, bundled in scarves and thick coats, stopping to peek inside the dimly lit bookstore and a tiny art gallery. There was a music shop where a young girl played cello in the window. The notes drifted into the street like fog. Lily stood still, her hand brushing Edward's. "It's like everything here breathes softer," she whispered. The next day, they climbed a hill behind the town, where the trees opened up to a view of the river winding below. There was a bench up there, carved with initials from couples long gone. Edward pulled a pen from his coat pocket. "Part 1, the hill. Should we leave our mark?" he asked. Lily smiled and said no. "I want to remember this just as it is." They sat on a hill as the sky turned dark. Edward pulled out a small notebook. "I started writing again," he said. "Because of you." He gave her a page. It was a poem about a woman with quiet fire and deep eyes. Lily could not speak. Her heart was full. The next day, they returned to New Haven. The town looked the same, but everything inside Lily had changed. She was not afraid anymore. She was in love, and she was ready to say it. Part 2, the confession. It was November. The trees were bare. The windows were covered in frost. Lily had practiced saying, "I love you" many times. But every time she saw Edward's calm eyes, the words stayed inside her. One Sunday, they walked near the train tracks. Edward talked about a story he was writing. Suddenly, Lily stopped. "What is it?" he asked. She looked at him. She saw his warm eyes and quiet patience. And then the words came. "I love you," she said. It was soft. It was real. Edward smiled. "I know," he said. "I have known for a while." "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked. "Because you weren't ready," he said. "I wanted you to have that moment." She held his hand. It was cold, but it fit with hers. Part 3, a simple mark. They passed an old fence with a heart carved into it. Edward pulled out a pen and wrote, L and E, November. No full names, no big words, just a small sign to remember the day. That night, they drank tea together. They read the same book. They sat under a shared blanket. No fireworks. No music. Just love. Finally spoken. Finally heard. Part 4. Winter together. The next days felt like a dream. Snow covered the roofs like sugar. Edward started staying at Lily's house more often. His mug was in her kitchen. His books were on her shelf. In the mornings, they shared breakfast. In the afternoons, they walked together. In the evenings, they wrote side by side. There was music, quiet smiles, and warmth. They did not need big words. They had love, and they were no longer alone. But as with every beautiful season, a shift was coming. It happened on a Tuesday, just after dusk. Lily was in the kitchen making stew when the doorbell rang. She thought it might be Ruth from the inn, dropping off the pie she'd promised. Wiping her hands on a towel, she walked barefoot to the door and opened it. But it wasn't Ruth. Standing on the porch, half covered in snow and wrapped in a long gray coat, was a woman in her late 30s. She had auburn hair pinned up tightly and sharp green eyes that flicked past Lily the moment the door opened. "I'm looking for Edward Whitlow," she said. Her voice was clear, practiced. Not a question, a statement. Lily's heartbeat shifted, like a floorboard that creaked where it never had before. "He's not here right now," Lily said carefully. "Can I help you?" The woman didn't answer right away. Instead, she glanced around the porch, then back at Lily, her gaze cool but not unkind. "I'm his wife," she said quietly. The world stopped. Lily's breath caught. The warmth from the kitchen behind her suddenly felt too far away. I'm sorry," she stammered. The woman nodded slowly, as if she had practiced saying this too many times before. "Not legally anymore," she added. "We separated 2 years ago, but he never signed the final papers. I wasn't even sure where he was until someone forwarded me his published story last month." She pulled out a folded page from her coat pocket. It was a printout of Edward's newest short story, the one inspired by Lily. The same story he'd read to her in pieces by the fireplace. The title stood out in bold black ink, "The Girl at the Train Station." "I read it," the woman said, "and I knew I had to come." Lily gripped the doorframe. "Why now?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. The woman's face softened, and for the first time, Lily saw something vulnerable in her. "Because I wanted to see who she was. The one who finally helped him feel again." She looked Lily in the eye. "I don't want to cause trouble. I'm not here to ruin anything. I need to talk to him. One last time." And then, just as Edward pulled into the driveway, headlights casting long shadows across the snow, the three of them were suddenly on the same page. The past, the present, and the moment where they would all collide. The meeting at the threshold. The soft crunch of tires over snow broke the stillness as Edward's car eased into the driveway. Lily didn't move from the doorway. Her fingers gripped the frame tighter while the woman beside her, Edward's not-quite ex-wife, stood still, composed, like someone prepared for a speech they never wanted to give. Edward stepped out of the car with a grocery bag tucked under one arm, smiling like nothing was wrong, until he saw them. The smile dropped. His body froze halfway toward the porch, as if hit by a gust of wind stronger than any winter chill. "Margot," he said, almost breathless. Margot gave a slight nod. "Hello, Edward." For a moment, Lily saw something flicker across Edward's face. Not guilt, not fear, something deeper. Memory, maybe grief. Then he looked at Lily. "I didn't know she was coming," he said quickly. "I can tell," Lily replied, her voice steady but cool. Edward took a slow step forward, then stopped just at the bottom of the porch steps. Margot spoke first. "I'm not here to cause problems. I'm not here to pull you back. I just needed to see you. One last time." Edward sighed. "You could have written, called." "I tried," she said gently. "But you changed numbers. You changed everything." There was a long silence, the kind that fills every inch of a room, even when you're outside. Then Lily quietly stepped aside. "Come inside, both of you." They entered the house like strangers stepping into a museum of someone else's life. The warmth of the kitchen, the soft music playing from the record player, the smell of stew, it all felt distant now, suspended. They sat at the table, the three of them. Lily across from Margot. Edward in the middle, hands clenched. Margot looked at him with the kind of sadness that came only after a long war, not of fighting, but of distance. I thought I hated you, she said softly. After you shut down, after you stopped talking, after you stopped being you. Edward looked away. But then I read that story, and I realized maybe it wasn't that you stopped being you. Maybe you just became someone else. Someone new. Lily didn't speak. She watched. I didn't come here to ask for anything, Margot continued. I just needed to let go in person. I needed to say that I forgive you. And I hope you forgive me too. Edward's voice was low. You didn't break me, Margot. Life did. I just didn't know how to bring you into the wreckage. She nodded, tears finally rising. I know, she whispered. There were no raised voices. No slamming doors. Just the sound of quiet understanding. Years too late, but not wasted. Eventually, Margot stood up. Thank you for letting me in, she said, looking at Lily with gratitude. He's a good man. He just needed someone brave enough to stay when it got hard. She left without asking for more. The door closed behind her, and Lily and Edward sat in the silence she left behind. Edward reached for Lily's hand. I should have told you everything, he said. About the papers. About how I ran from it all. I wish you had, she answered honestly. But I'm glad I know now. They sat like that for a while, not holding on, not pushing away, just being still. Because real love doesn't mean nothing ever goes wrong. It means choosing to stay, even when the past knocks on your door. Winter's test. Snow came heavy that night. By morning, the world outside Lily's window had transformed into a sea of white. Tree branches bent low with the weight of fresh powder, and the street was nearly silent except for the distant scrape of a snowplow passing through town. Inside, Lily sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a warm mug of tea. Edward stood across from her, leaning against the counter. They hadn't spoken much since Margot left. The words exchanged last night still lingered in the air, fragile as frost. I should have told you about her, Edward said again, softer now. Not because I owed you a clean past, but because I owed you trust. Lily nodded. It wasn't just the past that caught me off guard. It was the way you froze. Like you were still partly there. Like I was watching someone I didn't know. He took a seat across from her. His eyes looked tired. Not from lack of sleep, but from the weight of everything that had resurfaced. I've never wanted to run from you, Lily, he said. But I've spent most of my life learning how to survive by running. I didn't know how to stand still until you. There was silence. The kind that follows truth. Then Lily spoke. Standing still is hard, especially when you're used to walking alone. Edward reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something wrapped in a cloth. He set it gently in front of her. Lily unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a small, worn compass, the kind sailors once carried, polished brass and etched with time. The needle quivered, always pointing north. It was my father's, Edward said. He gave it to me when I was 15 and told me, even when you're lost, the earth knows where you are. I've carried it ever since. He took a breath. But I think maybe now you're my north. Lily didn't respond right away. Her fingers brushed the compass, its cool metal smooth under her skin. I don't need perfect, Edward, she said. I just need honest. I need real, even when it's messy. He nodded, something in his eyes settling, like a storm passing. They spent the rest of that snowed-in day inside, reading, writing, laughing again, rebuilding what had been shaken. But outside, the world was changing. By afternoon, the town issued a warning. The power grid was overloaded and rolling blackouts were expected. By evening, the lights flickered and then went out. Lily lit candles. Edward gathered blankets. And as the temperature dropped, they sat near the fireplace. Fire crackling, shadows dancing on the walls. Two people who had weathered more than just snow. I think we'll be okay, Edward whispered, as Lily rested her head on his shoulder. We will, she said, because now we don't run. The night the town went dark. The storm that arrived that night was unlike any New Haven had seen in decades. By 10 p.m., the wind howled like an animal, rattling windows and whistling down empty streets. The snow didn't fall, it roared. Thick, fast, relentless. The town became a ghost, swallowed by white and silence. Lily and Edward huddled by the fireplace, wrapped in blankets, the glow of candles casting long shadows on the walls. The power was still out. Cell service had vanished. Even a radio signal crackled, then died. "This is more than just a storm," Edward said, standing and peeking out through the frosted window. "This is going to shut down everything for days." Lily nodded, rubbing her hands together. "I've never seen it like this. Even during blizzards growing up the town didn't go this still." Then, a loud knock at the door. Both of them froze. Edward grabbed a flashlight and walked toward the door cautiously. When he opened it, a blast of snow came in, along with a figure in a heavy coat, nearly buried in white. "Sorry," the man said, breathing heavily. "I'm from a shelter down on Maple Street. We lost power and heat. We got 30 people inside. No generator. We need help." Lily was already grabbing her boots before Edward could answer. "I've got food," she said. "Blankets too. Come in and warm up, then we'll figure out how to get everything there." The man, his name was Carlos, shook the snow from his coat and looked around the small home, eyes filled with exhaustion. "They're getting sick in there. Some of them are kids." Lily and Edward exchanged a glance. No hesitation. This wasn't just about them anymore. Within 10 minutes, they had packed Lily's wagon sled with canned goods, bread, tea, and anything warm they could find. Edward strapped his backpack with water jugs and first aid supplies. Carlos led them through the back alleyways to avoid fallen trees and buried cars. The walk to the shelter was brutal. Wind knifed through layers. Snowdrifts rose waist-high. But the compass Edward had given Lily was in her coat pocket now. A reminder that even lost paths can lead somewhere worth reaching. When they finally arrived, the shelter was dim, lit only by a few flickering lanterns and the soft moans of children trying to sleep through cold. Lily's heart broke at the sight. Thin blankets, shivering bodies, fear in the eyes of mothers. "We'll help," she said firmly. Edward immediately started boiling water on a camping stove. Lily helped distribute food and blankets. They worked side by side with others who had stayed behind. Ruth from the inn, the bookstore owner, even the local pastor. For the next 12 hours, they became a team. A family. Not just surviving, but protecting. Rebuilding. By dawn, the snow finally stopped. The town was still, buried and breathless, but alive. Lily sat on the floor of the shelter, her back against Edward's chest, his arms around her. Children were sleeping now, warm, fed, safe. "You know what I realized tonight?" she whispered. Wada murmured. "That love isn't just saying it. It's showing up. When it's cold. When it's hard. When the lights go out and someone knocks on your door." Edward kissed the top of her head gently. "And we showed up," he said. "Together." And in that dark shelter, surrounded by strangers who no longer felt like strangers, Lily felt more at home than she ever had before. After the snow, when the sun finally broke through the clouds the next morning, New Haven didn't sparkle. It groaned. The storm had left behind more than snow. Power lines snapped like broken branches, cars entombed in white. Trees collapsed under the weight of a winter that came too soon and stayed too long. But there was something else, too. Something stronger than the damage. Hope. Lily and Edward stayed at the shelter until the town began stirring back to life. When the National Guard trucks finally rolled in from the highway, they found not a town in despair, but a town already healing itself. Pot by pot, blanket by blanket, hand by hand. "You think people always come together like this?" Lily asked, brushing snow from her scarf as they walked back to her house, arm in arm. Edward smiled. "No, but you do. And that kind of heart pulls everyone with it." She looked up at him, cheeks pink from cold, eyes soft. "You give me too much credit." "No," he said gently. "Not nearly enough." Back at home, the power had flickered back to life. The kettle on the stove hummed to a low boil. But instead of resting, Lily walked toward the attic. "I want to show you something," she said. Edward followed her through the narrow staircase. The attic was warm from insulation, lit by a single skylight. Along the walls were boxes, some dusty, some open, and one large trunk in the corner. Lily knelt beside it and slowly opened the lid. Inside were journals, letters, sketches, photographs, pieces of a younger Lily, fragile, curious, wounded. "I used to write all the time," she said, "but never shared it. Not even with people I loved. Not even with myself. Really. I wrote to survive, but I was too scared to let anyone read me. Edward sat beside her, quiet. She handed him a small brown notebook. It was worn around the edges, the cover soft like leather that had been handled too many times. Read page 12, she whispered. He opened the notebook carefully. His eyes scanned the page. I want a love that stays when I'm scared. A love that doesn't fix me, just holds me while I heal. I want to believe someone will sit beside me in the dark and not ask me to speak, just stay. Edward swallowed. You wrote this before we met. 3 years ago, Lily nodded. I didn't know you yet, but I think I was already hoping you existed. He gently closed the notebook and looked at her. And I think I was walking toward you my whole life. They sat like that for a while, surrounded by memories of who they once were and the quiet promise of who they were becoming. Outside, the sun shone brighter now, warming the ice-covered town bit by bit. And somewhere in that melting quiet, Lily understood something for the first time. Love wasn't the end of her story. It was the chapter that taught her how to write the rest. The letter with no return address. A week after the storm, life in New Haven slowly settled back into routine. Power was restored across town. The roads were cleared, and the warmth of wood-burning stoves returned to cafe corners and bookstores. Children returned to school with stories of sleeping in shelters and sharing marshmallows with strangers. The town wasn't the same, it was stronger. For Lily and Edward, things were quieter now, in the best way. Their days were filled with small rituals, sharing the crossword at breakfast, exchanging pages of writing, and taking evening walks through streets that still held snow at the edges. But one morning, just after the mail carrier trudged up the icy walk and slid a bundle of envelopes through the front slot, something changed. Among the bills and flyers, there was a single pale blue envelope with no return address. It was handwritten in looping cursive, old-fashioned and neat. Just Lily's name. Nothing else. She held it in her hands, hesitating. Her fingers tingled with a strange mixture of nerves and nostalgia. Edward noticed a shift in her face. What is it? I'm not sure, she whispered. But this handwriting, it looks familiar. He watched as she sat on the couch, carefully tearing open the flap. Inside was a folded letter. The ink slightly smudged in places, like it had been handled too much or written with emotion too close to the surface. As she read, her hands trembled slightly. Dear Lily, I don't know if this will ever reach you, or if you'll even want to read it if it does. But I've thought about you every day for the past 7 years. When I left, I told myself I was doing the right thing, giving you space, giving myself time to figure out who I was. But I see now I left out of fear. You love me more than I knew how to receive. And I never said thank you for that. I heard from my sister that you're still in New Haven, and that you smile again. That means more to me than I can explain. This isn't a plea. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted to say what I never could. You taught me what love was. I only wish I'd known how to love you back when it mattered. I hope you're happy. M. Lily's breath caught. She folded the letter slowly, her chest rising and falling with a storm of feelings that had been buried long ago. Edward waited. Do you want to talk about it? She nodded. His name was Michael, she said finally. We were together for almost 3 years. He left without a goodbye. No closure. Just vanished. Edward didn't speak. He didn't press. He just waited. Lily looked up at him. It hurt. For a long time, I blamed myself. And when I stopped blaming myself, I stopped believing in connection altogether. Until you. She held the letter in her lap like a stone. Not heavy, but meaningful. I don't hate him, she said softly. But I don't belong to that chapter anymore. Edward took her hand. Then we don't need to reopen it. Lily smiled, her eyes wet but steady. I just needed to know it wasn't all in vain. That I didn't love someone who forgot me. You didn't, Edward said gently. You loved someone who wasn't ready. That's not the same as being forgotten. They sat in silence for a moment, the letter on the table between them. Not a threat, not a temptation. Just a page from a story that had already ended. Later that evening, Lily took the letter, slid it into a box of old journals, and wrote one new line in the front page of a fresh notebook. I'm no longer waiting for anyone to come back. I'm already home. A door of their own. The following weekend, the snow began to melt in earnest. Streams of water trickled down gutters, and the sidewalks turned from slippery white to gritty gray. New Haven buzzed gently again. Markets reopened, coffee shops filled with laughter, and neighbors who barely spoke before were now bonded by store memories and soup kitchens. Lily and Edward sat at their favorite window booth in the Cornerstone Cafe, watching the street through steamed-up glass. Edward was quieter than usual, stirring his coffee, but barely sipping it. Lily noticed. "You're somewhere else," she said, nudging his boot under the table. He looked up with a soft smile. "Just thinking. Dangerous." He laughed gently. "Maybe. Or maybe overdue." She tilted her head. "Tell me." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded letter. Another one, but not from someone else this time. This one was typed. The letterhead was clean and sharp. The Hastings Writers' Residency, New York City. Lily blinked. Edward slid the letter to her. "I applied 2 months ago," he said. "Before everything. Before us." She read the letter in silence. It was an offer. A prestigious 3-month residency in Manhattan. All expenses paid. Full creative freedom. A career milestone. "When did you get this?" she asked. 3 days ago, he replied. "I didn't know if I should show you. I didn't want to drop this on us after what we've built." Lily folded the letter and set it on the table. "Do you want to go?" Edward hesitated. "I don't want to leave you." That's not the same as answering. He looked at her, really looked. "Yes, I want to go, but not if it costs us." Lily leaned forward. "Then take me with you." He blinked. She smiled. "I mean it. My teaching contract ends this semester. I've been feeling something tugging inside me lately, a need to grow, to move, to create something more. Maybe this is that more." Edward's breath caught. "Are you sure?" "No." She laughed. "But I wasn't sure about you either. And that turned out to be the best yes I've ever said." They held each other's hands across the table, excitement buzzing in their chests like a second heartbeat. But later that evening, as they walked home, something stopped them. It was an old shop front, a narrow brick building just off Main Street, with dusty windows and a faded for lease sign hanging crooked in the glass. Lily stood in front of it for a long time. "I used to dream about this place," she said. "Back in college. I imagined it as a little community bookshop, with a corner for poetry readings. Maybe a small classroom upstairs." Edward stood beside her, watching her face light up. "You still could," he said. She looked at him, torn between the door in front of her and the train tracks behind them. "Maybe it's not a choice between dreams," she whispered. "Maybe we make both happen, just not all at once." Edward smiled. "Let's go to New York. But when we come back." She finished the sentence for him. "We open this door." They stood together in front of that dusty window, their reflections blurred but close. Because sometimes love wasn't choosing one path over another. Sometimes it was building the bridge between them, the city between them. New York welcomed them not with open arms, but with flashing horns, impatient crosswalks, and the scent of roasted peanuts and rain on concrete. The city was a living rhythm, pulsing with ambition, sleeplessness, and stories stacked on top of each other like fire escapes. Edward had been here before, for meetings, signings, brief readings in small venues. But this was different. This time he came not as a guest, but as a writer with a room of his own. The residency provided him a small studio apartment on the Upper West Side, cozy, filled with light, and lined with bookshelves that seemed to breathe inspiration into the walls. Lily stayed with him at first, the two of them adapting quickly to the music of a life that never truly quieted. She took long morning walks through Central Park, notebook in hand, documenting people's glances, overheard dialogue, the way the city seemed to always be in a hurry to say something. Edward spent his days in the writing room provided by the residency, his fingers dancing across keys with an urgency he hadn't felt in years. But with the inspiration came something else, distance. Not emotional, not resentful, just space. They were building something individually now, and that meant carving hours apart in a city that could stretch time strangely. One evening, Lily returned to the apartment alone. Edward had stayed late at the residency building to finish a chapter. She walked in, slipped off her coat, and stood by the window. The skyline flickered like a pulse. People below darted from taxis to subways like chess pieces, all chasing something. She loved this place. And yet, she missed the stillness of New Haven. She missed knowing everyone who passed by her window. She missed hearing her own thoughts without the hum of sirens in the background. Edward returned past 10. His face was bright, glowing even. "I think I finished the first draft," he said breathlessly. "That's incredible," Lily said sincerely, hugging him tight. "You did it." But even as she smiled, something tightened quietly in her chest. Not jealousy, not sadness, just a question beginning to form. Where do I fit into this version of us? That weekend, they took a break. Not from each other, from the noise. They boarded the Staten Island ferry early Saturday morning and found a quiet bench on the upper deck. The wind bit at their faces, but the water was calm, and the city's roar faded behind them. "I think I'm a little lost," Lily admitted as they sat side by side. Edward looked at her. "Talk to me." She took a breath. "I'm proud of you. So proud. But here, I'm just floating. I'm not writing like you are. I'm not teaching. I haven't found a rhythm. And I'm scared that I'm just orbiting your dream." He didn't respond right away, just stared out across the water. Then he turned to her and said, "Then let's find your anchor." Lily blinked. "You gave me the strength to chase this," he continued. "Now it's my turn to help you chase something." She looked at him, wind in his hair, eyes honest and steady. "I don't even know what that is yet," she whispered. "Then we start with what makes your heart beat faster," he said, "and we follow it, brick by brick." As the ferry turned back toward the glittering skyline, Lily leaned against him. She didn't have all the answers yet, but maybe that was okay, because love, in this new version, wasn't about finishing each other's stories. It was about helping each other write the next page. Her own chapter begins. A week after their ferry ride, Lily woke up earlier than Edward, who had fallen asleep at his desk again, still surrounded by manuscripts and half-empty teacups. She slipped on his oversized sweater, padded across the wooden floor in bare feet, and made herself a cup of coffee. But instead of reaching for her journal, she reached for the notebook she had once tucked away, the one from New Haven. The same notebook where, years ago, she had written about love and fear and the silence between those things. She hadn't opened it in months. This time, she didn't write poetry. She wrote a story. It started simply. A woman on a train, traveling not toward a destination, but away from her own silence. Each line came slowly, hesitantly at first, like Lily was knocking on a locked door with no idea who might answer. But by the time the sun rose over the city and streaked golden light across the living room, her pages were filled, and something in her chest, something long asleep, began to breathe again. Later that afternoon, she wandered into the East Village alone, notebook in hand. A flyer in the bookstore window caught her eye. Open mic for first-time writers. No judgment, just stories. Friday, 6 p.m., Paper Lantern Book Cafe. She stood there staring at it. And for the first time in years, she didn't walk away. Friday, 6:04 p.m. The bookstore cafe was warm and alive with quiet energy. People sipped tea and leaned into one another's stories. A string of fairy lights lined the stage, which was really just a rug in front of Mike and a chair. Lily signed her name on the open mic list. She was fifth. Her palms were sweating. She sat alone at the edge of the room, her notebook trembling slightly in her hands. Edward didn't know she was here. She hadn't told him. This was for her. When they called her name, her knees felt soft, but she walked forward anyway. She sat on the stool, adjusted the mic, and began to read. Her voice at first was quiet, but as the story unfolded, the woman on the train, the letters in her bag, the bench at the station, her voice grew stronger. People leaned in. A man in the corner stopped typing. Someone nodded softly at a line about loving in silence. When she finished, there was no eruption of applause, just soft clapping and something better, the kind of silence that follows something true. Afterward, a woman in her 40s approached her. "That was beautiful," she said. "Have you ever thought about teaching? We run a creative writing class here for women rebuilding after trauma. I think you'd be perfect." Lily blinked. I haven't taught writing before," she admitted. The woman smiled. "That's okay. You've lived it." She handed Lily a card. "Come by Monday if you're interested." That night, Lily returned to the apartment glowing. Edward looked up from his pages. "Where'd you go?" She handed him a folded napkin with a note written in pen. "I read out loud tonight, and someone heard me. I think I found the door." He looked up at her, pride filling every part of him. "You opened it," he whispered. They sat together in silence. And for once, Lily didn't feel like a passenger in someone else's journey. Growing in parallel. By the end of February, New York had thawed just enough to remind its residents that spring was waiting. Patches of dirty snow lingered between curbs, but the air had softened and sunlight lasted just a little longer each day. Lily had started teaching once a week at the Paper Lantern Book Cafe. It wasn't a traditional classroom. There were no desks, no tests. Just a circle of chairs, mismatched mugs of tea, and a group of women who had each come through something heavy. Divorce, illness, abandonment, recovery. Lily didn't try to fix them. She didn't tell them what to write. She simply invited them to say what had never been said. And in doing so, she found herself healing in the process. One of her students, a shy woman named Janelle, had once whispered, "I didn't know I could still be brave." And Lily had smiled and replied, "Sometimes bravery sounds like your own voice on paper." Edward, meanwhile, was thriving in the residency. His novel had taken shape, a sweeping love story set in a coastal town, full of trains, letters, and quiet courage. The directors were already murmuring about publishing deals, readings, even a potential adaptation. But with success came time apart. They still shared their mornings, their evenings, but their days, their creative lives, now belonged to different worlds. One night, Lily came home later than usual, cheeks flushed from class that had run over time. She found Edward asleep on the couch, manuscript pages scattered across his chest. He looked peaceful, tired, beautiful. She stood there for a moment, watching him, and something inside her ached, not from distance, but from change, because she realized they were no longer growing in the same direction. They were growing side by side, two trees with separate trunks, separate sunlight, but roots still touching. The next morning, over coffee, she brought it up gently. "Do you ever feel like we're drifting?" she asked. Edward looked at her, surprised. "Not drifting," he said after a moment. "Evolving." She smiled. "Good answer." "But yeah," he added, "some days I feel like I barely see you anymore. And when I do, I'm tired. And so are you." Lily nodded. "We haven't had a weekend, just us, in almost a month." He set his mug down. "Let's fix that." "How?" He pulled out his phone and showed her a listing, a quiet cabin rental in the Catskills. No Wi-Fi, just a fireplace, a record player, and a view of the stars. "We'll go," he said. "Just us. No books, no classes, no expectations. Just us remembering why this started in the first place." Lily stared at the screen, heart blooming with relief. "Yes," she whispered. "Let's disappear for just a little while." They booked the trip that night, and as they packed their bags days later, something inside both of them settled. Not into old patterns, but into something better. They weren't returning to what they'd been. They were choosing what came next. Together. The cabin in the quiet. The cabin sat at the edge of a frozen lake, nestled in a ring of pine trees that swayed gently in the early March wind. The road to get there wound through sleepy towns and empty roads, their cell signal vanishing an hour before arrival. By the time Lily and Edward pulled into the gravel driveway, it was nearly sunset. The silence was immediate. Not the kind of silence that pressed against you, but the kind that welcomed you in. A silence with space for breath. Lily stepped out first and tilted her head toward the pale sky. "I forgot what this kind of quiet sounds like." Edward wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "It's the sound of nobody needing anything from us." Inside, the cabin was simple. Wood walls, a stone fireplace, wool blankets folded neatly on the edge of a deep sofa. The bedroom held a bed covered in a thick quilt, and the windows looked out onto the still surface of the lake, where snow clung to the edges like lace. That night, after a dinner cooked slowly together, no timers, no distractions, they lit a fire and sat on the floor in front of it. The warmth settled around them like memory. For a long time, they didn't speak. And it was perfect. until Lily broke the silence. Do you think we could live like this? She asked. No noise. No internet. Just space? Edward leaned back on his hands, considering. Maybe not forever, he said, but I think we need this more often than we admit. He turned toward her. You've changed. So have you. Do you like the version of me I'm becoming? She smiled softly. I love him. A pause. Then Edward reached into his bag and pulled out a leather-bound notebook, the one he used only when something felt truly important. He handed it to her. I wrote something last night, he said. Not for the novel. Not for the residency. Just for you. Lily opened it slowly. On the first page, handwritten, to the woman who taught me that quiet doesn't mean absence. That love doesn't require fixing. That I'm not a better writer because of you. I'm a better man. She kept reading. Every page held a letter, a memory, a moment, a promise, all addressed to her. Edward's version of I love you had always been gentle, often wordless. But here, in this notebook, he had finally said everything. By the time she reached the last page, her cheeks were wet. I don't know what to say, she whispered. You don't have to, he said, reaching for her hand. You've been saying it in everything you've done, in every time you stayed, every time you asked me to stay. They spent the rest of that night curled beneath the quilt, not sleeping, not rushing, just rediscovering the edges of one another in firelight and quiet breath. The next morning, snow fell lightly. Lily stood on the porch, notebook in hand, writing again. And this time, her story wasn't about a woman who ran from silence. It was about a woman who built a life inside it, and found someone who didn't fear the stillness, but added music to it. The question that changed everything. By the time Lily and Edward returned to New York, the city had already begun shedding its winter skin. Storefronts opened their windows to the breeze. Crocuses bloomed defiantly through cracks in the sidewalk, and people walked a little slower, lingered a little longer, as if spring had taught them to breathe again. They arrived back in the apartment lighter, quieter. The cabin hadn't just given them rest, it had reminded them of their rhythm. Not the fast-paced, city-bred tempo they'd been caught in, but their own slower, deeper beat. That evening, while Edward unpacked, Lily stood by the window watching the sun dip behind the skyline. Below, the street was pulsing with life again. Food carts, music, children's laughter echoing between buildings. And suddenly, she knew. She turned toward Edward, who was bent over his laptop, scrolling through emails that had stacked up during their time off. Ed, she said quietly. He looked up. Yeah? I don't want to stay in the city. He froze, not in fear, but in full attention. You don't? She walked over to the kitchen counter, pulled out a folded piece of paper from her coat pocket, and placed it in front of him. It was a lease agreement for the little brick building in New Haven, the old storefront, the one she dreamed about. I called Ruth before we left the cabin, Lily said, heart pounding. She knows the landlord. They haven't had any other serious interest. He agreed to hold it for a week. Edward read the paper slowly, processing. You want to open the bookshop? He asked. Lily nodded. Not just a bookshop. A space for writing circles. For people like the women in my class. For voices that don't get stages. For letters that never found mailboxes. She looked at him, her voice soft but certain. I love this city, and I love you. But I've realized my dream lives somewhere else. Not in the noise, but in the quiet places. In the ones I can fill with story. Edward set the paper down and walked around the counter. Then we do it, he said simply. Lily blinked. What? We do it, he repeated. We go home. But your residency ends in 2 months, he said. And the novel's almost done. The only thing I haven't figured out yet is what comes next. Now I know. Tears pricked the corners of her eyes. You'd give all this up? He smiled. I'm not giving anything up. I'm moving forward. With you. He reached into his back pocket, suddenly awkward, then pulled out something small in velvet. Lily froze. Edward opened it. Inside, a simple ring. A single stone set in a silver band, elegant and quiet. Like her. I was going to wait, he said. Maybe take you to that spot by the lake again. But it feels right now. He looked her straight in the eyes, voice low but steady. Will you come home with me? Not just to New Haven, but to a life we build, page by page, season by season. Lily didn't answer with words. She leaned in and kissed him. And that was her answer. Outside, the city still buzzed. But in that moment, inside their small apartment high above the noise, the world felt still and full of beginning. Final chapter, but not the end. 2 months later, they stood outside the old brick building on Main Street in New Haven. The one Lily had dreamed about since she was 23. Now it was theirs. The faded "For Lee" sign was gone, replaced with a hand-painted wooden one above the door that read, "The Quiet Chapter." Books, letters, light. Inside, the shelves were slowly filling. Not with bestsellers or mass shipments, but with hand-picked titles, secondhand treasures, poetry chapbooks from local writers, and personal donations from neighbors who wandered in just to ask, "Is this really open now?" The back corner had been transformed into a writing circle space. Warm lighting, low cushions, a fireplace that Edward insisted on restoring brick by brick. The upstairs, once dusty storage, was now their home, a small loft apartment that smelled like books, coffee, and morning light. They didn't plan a grand opening. Instead, they hosted a letter-writing night. No emails, no phones, just paper, pens, and candlelight. People of all ages came, teenagers, widows, couples holding hands. Each wrote a letter, to someone they'd lost, to someone they missed, to someone they loved but never said it. At the end of the night, Lily stood before the group with tears in her eyes. "We open this place because we believe stories don't end when a chapter closes," she said. "They begin again, quieter, stronger." Tuwa. The crowd applauded, not wildly, but warmly, genuinely. Edward stood beside her, his arm around her waist, whispering, "You did it." "No," she said, smiling up at him. "We did." Over the next weeks, the Quiet Chapter became more than a shop. It became a sanctuary, a place where people found pieces of themselves on forgotten pages, where silence was welcomed, and voices returned one sentence at a time. One afternoon, a teenage girl walked in, clutching a journal to her chest. She asked if there was a place to sit. Lily showed her to the window seat. She stayed for hours. When she left, she whispered, "Thank you for making space." That night, Lily and Edward sat by the fire, watching the snow fall again, gentler this time. "We build a life," Lily whispered. "No," Edward replied, brushing a lock of hair behind her ear. "We're still building." Outside, winter softened the streets. Inside, two people who had once been lost in silence now lived inside a story they had written together. Not perfect, not without pain, but full of heart. And in the window of the Quiet Chapter, a small hand-lettered sign always remained. "This story isn't finished. Come inside and write the next page." The end.